Learn from my mistake. Are you tired of hearing the same old advice when it comes to real estate? Do you want to learn from the biggest and baddest mistakes in the industry? Then welcome to Learn from My Mistake, the podcast that brings you real estate professionals from all over, sharing the biggest blunders and how to avoid them. I'm one of your hosts, Jake Remillard, and I'm joined by my partner, Marie Baginski. We're here to give you the inside scoop on what not to do in the real estate game. From brokers to investors, we've got it all. We're not just here to tell you about our guest failures, though. We're here to help you learn from them so you can make the right moves when it counts. So buckle up and get ready to hear some juicy stories and expert advice you won't find anywhere else. This is Learn from My Mistake. New episodes drop every week. Don't miss out. Learn from my up.
Hello. All right. We are officially live on Learn from My Mistake. Tom, I believe you are guest number 9, right?
Yes.
I think we're on week 9. So started just a couple months ago and it's been going fast.
Nice.
For everybody joining in, I am Marie Baginski, followed by my co-host.
No, that works. Yeah.
Host.
Jake Remillard. How's it going, everybody?
All right. And today we have our guest is Tom Swan. So Tom, for anyone who doesn't know you, why don't you just give a brief intro into who you are, what you do?
So I am a real estate investor in Phoenix. I'm originally from Connecticut. I've specialized in short-term rental for the last 4 years. I've been in the real estate game for about 6 years. I started with flipping and then got into short-term rental, and then got into short-term rental. Still do like working on a flip right now, but that's been my game for the last few years.
Yeah. And just elaborate for us on the short-term rental market. You know, what was your kind of strategy getting in, or why did you choose short-term rentals? And then was it just like Airbnb, VRBO?
Yeah. So when I got into short-term rental, I was really just trying to get more consistent cash flow, because flips are great cash when they work. But you got to wait 6-9 months to get that payday. So trying to get more consistent cash flow. And I got into short-term rental through arbitrage. So I was actually not owning the properties. I was renting the properties from a landlord, furnishing them, and then sticking them on the platforms. In this market, it's heavy Airbnb. I use Airbnb and VRBO primarily. Other platforms just didn't work for me. And maybe it was my, not diving into them as much because I was getting so much through the other, OTAs, the Airbnb and VRBO platforms. But, it's, those are the two primaries. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were looking for cash flow.
Yes.
I'm assuming that means you might have had a flip that didn't go so well.
Yeah. If I was thinking about that during the intro, we were talking about short-term rental, but I was like, boy, do I have a flip story that's one for the ages. But
let's go, share it. I want to hear it.
Dive right into it.
Yeah, don't hold back.
So right during the 2020 COVID shutdown, I finished up one flip that kind of got dragged on to be not that profitable. And then I went into another one, and different contractor. I thought I vetted them out. So the short end of it is I told them that, we went over all these details about having to get it done fast. And I don't want to hold this thing for a year, and, it's hard money, blah, blah, blah. Well, the short story is it ended up taking 11 months on what should have been 3 to 4 months. They overbilled me by about 50% of what our contract was. So it was about 150% of agreed upon price, which was a lot because they overbilled me by over $80,000. And it was a big renovation, but where the extra money went made no sense. And so ultimately, at the end of the job, they ended up throwing this huge bill at me. I fought them on it. They sued me, and I ended up losing, which sucked. So, lessons to learn would be: one, make sure you have a rock solid contract that you write. Two, make sure any changes are discussed and changed into writing with change orders, no matter what the contractor says or tells you. And three, don't get in a lawsuit, because even if they're threatening to sue you, like, it would have cost me so much less money just to pay them off, as much as it would have hurt my ego.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it would have saved me well over $100,000.
Wow.
So at the beginning of that, you mentioned, you were talking to them about the timeline. We need this to be kind of a 3-4 month thing. It was prolonged to 11. Aside from all the change orders and everything, what was it that, dragged it out that additional time?
So it was during the shutdown in 2020, and like during COVID times, everything was way slower, and the city of Phoenix wasn't taking. So we converted a garage into a carport, carport into a garage, and so the city of Phoenix wasn't taking in-person appointments, but the architect who had to design the whole thing, like, insisted on getting an in-person appointment. He's like, "Oh, I'll make you go a lot faster." And we were like, "Well, we all know, like, the city's told us multiple times that they're not taking in-person appointments. So just file it online and speed the process up." So I'm assuming the contractor's taking care of this. And, I kept checking in with them on a weekly basis, like, "Where are we at with this permit? Where are we at with this permit?" And we couldn't really do anything until that permit was issued. Well, it turns out that the architect didn't even submit for the permit for 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
And because they kept telling me, like, "Oh, we're just waiting on a response. We're waiting on a response." And I was like, all right, so I assume it's filed. I assume it's COVID, so it's getting dragged on.
Right.
But then come to find out that the guy never even submitted for it because he was pushing for the in-person appointment. And I was like, well, what the hell? Like, you just cost me, I got $5,000 a month in holding costs just in hard money alone. That's interest. That's coming straight out of profit. So, I'm like, what the hell? Like, you guys got to compensate for this, and we had in our agreement, but the way that it just turned into a mess. But the way that they had written it was that, because I had them write into the contract that if they took more than 6 months to get the job done, that they were going to pay my holding costs. And the way they wrote it was, it was 6 months from the time that they got the permit in hand.
Gotcha.
And when I got into it, like, A, I had not done a job where we'd done that much of a conversion before, and B, like, I mean, these guys do commercial buildings, like, they were a bigger company. So I was like, it was my first time dealing with that. So I was just like, all right, like, when I read through it, I was like, I didn't really think
about that
detail, right? The permit could potentially take 6 months to get.
Yeah.
Right. So thinking about that and, like, going back as a lesson learned, what would you do differently now? Would you have asked that specific question? Like, well, did you file for the permit? Like, how do you think you could have handled it differently looking back?
Man, there's a lot of things. Like, how long do you want this podcast to be?
Just a high level.
High level, I would say, if you're ever uncertain, pay the money and have a lawyer go through it, because it's like, it might be expensive up front, but it will save you so much money in the long run. And just go through the contract, like, word by word with a fine tooth comb, because and don't feel like, like don't feel like you're going to offend somebody by pushing back on them. That's what I think. And I'm totally guilty of that, but, like, that's what I think people get hung up on, is they're like, "Oh, well, I don't want to push too hard. Like, I feel like I'm asking for too much." It's like, no, dude, I'm about to pay you $100,000. Like, I want this thing to be right. Like, this better be exactly what we agree on. And
And
if
that
you
was,
got any questions, ask them.
yeah, no, that's a great, great comment. I think I myself am guilty of that too. You know, when it comes down to either the negotiation or the contract phase, I'm like, I'm going to put all of this stuff in here, but not pushing super hard.
Yeah.
Now, Tom, you were saying you used their contract, so they came out, quoted you, and then they had a contract for the work that they presented to you.
Yeah, exactly. And man, looking back on that one, that is one that like, the thing is it was right at Camelback and 32nd, like right in freaking Arcadia, Biltmore, like prime location. And also what I think happened was that was right during the huge hyperinflation run up.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So when I bought the house, like I bought it for $400 from a wholesaler. I was planning on putting about $200 into it and then selling it for $770. So I was like, actually, I was planning on putting about $150 into it. So I had about a $200,000 margin. And
did you end up making money on that house or not at all?
No, because so you want all the details?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I got it under contract at $770. Within like 2 weeks, like 2 houses in the neighborhood. Look, this is not $1 million house by any means. I'm from Connecticut. This house would go for about 300. Now would go for about 300 grand in back where I lived. But because it's in this prime location, it's like these houses are starting to go for $1 million. And I'm like, I'm like walking around the neighborhood and I'm like, you've got to be freaking kidding me. Like you're talking about a 2,000 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, like built in the 70s. It's nothing special. And it's on like, I don't even think the lot was 10,000 square feet.
Right. It's
tiny. So I'm like, how are people paying $1 million? But like houses started going for, 800, 900, and then over $1 million, all within like a 3-week span. Wow. In the neighborhood. Like you could throw a rock to these. So I'm like, all right, well, my margin just went up, but I think the contractor was thinking the same thing. They're like, oh, well, you're going to make more money. We can make more money. So, which is totally unscrupulous. It's like not all how things should go. But so what happened was they initially came out and quoted the job. And so the way I lost it, this is why I lost the lawsuit, is because they came out and quoted the job and their estimator gave me one price. And he said, but I'm waiting for 2 subs to get back to me. Once they get back to me, I'll give you a final price. I don't think it's going to change that much, but let's reconvene in a week. So we said, we'll sign this number into the contract because they wanted to have a signed contract in order to start work.
Yeah.
Fine. He comes back to me a week later. He goes, all right, the subs got back to me. He's going to add 15 grand to the estimate. And I'm like, I got $200,000 in margin. I'm like, fine, that's whatever. Like we go over it. I'm like, that's fine. Just, let's get it going. So where I fucked up was he sent it to me on a spreadsheet and we never wrote that into the contract and we never issued a change order. That is the only time they discussed any price change with me. 11 months later, they finished the job finally. After the permit took us like
way too long,
6 months, like 4 or 5, maybe 6 months to get it. I forget. It was a long freaking time. So we finished the job and then they hit me with this extra bill. And I'm like, where did this money go? And on top of that, like just for my, whatever, like I took the flooring and the appliances out of the contract and paid for them out of pocket. So if anything, the job should have gone down.
Wow.
They overbilled me and then I fought it. So they sued me. And what I lost the lawsuit on was the judge ruled because of that initial transaction or initial change in pricing, because we didn't adhere to the contract and sign it in, that basically the contract was void. And
then the whole contract was void?
Basically, she said we established a pattern of not adhering to the contract. And so therefore they could just, anything, nothing had to be adhered to as far as what they were saying. It was complete bullshit, but I got hosed on it big time.
That's
So
crazy.
yeah.
And so you said like this is a bigger company. Do you think so? You said they rush you to get it under contract, right? Which is
Yeah.
basic sales tactic. They want to lock you in, and
Yeah.
then they saw the inflation in the neighborhood where it was rising up, and they never discussed the change order. So do you think them being a bigger company that maybe this is like a tactic of some of these
Oh,
larger
100%.
firms?
Because it also came out in the lawsuit that they had been sued for this twice before. They had been sued for this exact same thing twice before, which they won both times, but they were actively being sued for fraud
Wow.
by another company, because it turned out they also they build like KFCs. Like they have a contract with somebody, whoever builds KFC, whoever the owner is of the KFCs here in Phoenix, they have the contract for like all of the KFCs.
Wow.
And so I think a KFC, and then they're like a range of like, I think Taco Bell or something, but they do all of that. But then they also contract for like Home Depot and Lowe's. So when you go and I was like, that makes no sense, because, like I found that out after the fact, but I was like, why would you go? I don't know. I've always like those contractors, like, while it's good business, they're usually like small independent contractors that are those like, home services contractors. So I was like, I don't know. The business model didn't make sense to me. It seemed kind of scrappy, but I was just like, they were being actively sued for fraud, and I was like, okay, all of this should work into my favor.
Right.
Like,
And it didn't.
we see that it's a pattern, but they had a really good lawyer. I'll put it that way. Yeah. I've actually contemplated hiring him.
Hey, remember me? Right?
So interesting fact, interesting fact, lesson learned talking about business and lawyers and stuff. So I've never shared this before, but me and my husband owned a pool hall back in New York before we moved to Arizona, right? And the person who we bought the pool hall from used his attorney, who was like a very stickler. Like we had to sign personal guarantees, and like I think we had to even put my mom's house up as collateral, like all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Then 3.5 years later, we go to sell the business to one of our employees, and the employee asked the old owner who his real estate agent was, or who his attorney was.
Yeah.
Sorry. And so that attorney then wanted to represent this guy. And I told my attorney, I want all the same regulations that he put on us. So like, I was like, this kid has to put his mother's house up for collateral. He's got to do this. He's got to do this. He's got to do this. And that attorney, when we got to the closing, was like, I would never tell my client to sign this. And I'm like, well, that's what you made me sign when you got me to sign. So we actually ended up walking away. The kid actually refused to sign. His attorney refused to sign, and we ended up selling it to somebody else.
Wow.
But attorneys get crazy,
right?
Yeah. Like, and a good attorney like makes all the difference.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because that was one thing, like in my case. So I worked with this attorney for, we worked on that thing for well over 6 months. And we got to went through the deposition, which their attorney ate me alive. Like I'd never been through a deposition, and I studied and practiced for it. And I got there, and I was just like, dude, I walked, if you've ever been, I hope I never wasted on anyone.
Take the fifth.
What's that?
Just say I take the fifth.
I just kept saying I don't understand. I don't know. I was very, very, very literal, with every single thing that he asked. So I made him ask the same thing 5 different ways until he backed me into a corner. Oh. And so, anyways, I don't wish depositions on anyone, because I sat there for 8 hours, and I left feeling like the biggest piece of shit in the world. And I was just I was like, damn, dude, he got to my soul. It's I didn't even do anything wrong. And he made me feel like I'm the worst human being alive. But on the flip side, my lawyer, we show up for the day of the trial, the one that matters the most. which I didn't sit on. There's another thing I learned. Like, I should have sat in on the deposition. Not that I think it would have changed the outcome in hindsight, but like, sitting in on the deposition of the other side, because anyways, my lawyer showed up completely
known what he was
unprepared.
going to say.
What's that?
I said you would have at least known what they were planning on saying if you said.
Well, I did, because I had the transcript.
Okay.
I got the whole transcript of what happened with the deposition, and I was satisfied with it. Like, I mean, I'd never been through a lawsuit, so it's like live and learn, first time through, right?
Yeah.
But the day of the trial, my lawyer showed up. Dude, the other side did opening arguments first, and like the first sentence out of his mouth was like, "Your Honor, we're here today to dispute this dollar amount." And my lawyer looks at me, because we're on Zoom, so I'm sitting in his office, but because it was still like COVID times in 2021, like they weren't doing in person, whatever, you can request it virtual. So he's sitting across from me, and he looks at me with like terror in his eyes, and he's like, "Where did this number come from?" And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me, dude? Like, this is the number we have been discussing for 6 months. I sat here for 2 hours yesterday and went over every aspect of the case with you. And you're asking, this is like the most basic, the number one detail of the whole fucking case. And you're asking me where this number came from. And all of a sudden you like start scrambling through like all his shit. And I'm like, holy shit, dude, we're going to lose. Like, I knew it 8 minutes in. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, after all of this. And then on top of that, this was where I really knew we were going to lose. So the other side does their opening arguments, and it was an arbitrator, not a judge. So she's an arbitrator, and she goes, all right, I'm going to stop you real quick, because, they're used to being in courtrooms. And so they're like, Judge, Your Honor, blah, blah, blah. So like, she goes, I'm going to stop you real quick. My name's Michelle. I go by Michelle. I don't go by Judge. I don't go by Your Honor. I know you guys are like used to being in courtrooms, but I'd really prefer, if to the best of your abilities, if you would refer to me as Michelle. Right. And so the other lawyer, he's like, oh, Michelle, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, he's like totally pandering to her. Right. My lawyer's like, that doesn't matter. And I'm like, oh, no. Like, so like literally she says that, next sentence out of his mouth, Your Honor, we're here today to dispute. And I'm like, oh my God, you're killing me. Like, oh. So we got like, he went on for like an hour, and I couldn't say anything because I'm on camera. And I'm like glaring at him. I'm like, dude, shut the fuck up. Like, call her Michelle. Like, she just asked to call Michelle. Like, call her by her name. It's like the least we can do to help.
I feel like you'd want to jump in though and be like, can I just represent myself, Michelle? He doesn't know what he's talking about.
At that point, I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me, dude. So like, I sat there and I was so steamed. And then like, we didn't have a break till like 10 o'clock. So the first like 2 hours, I just sit there and just watch this train wreck. And then we got to a break, and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why do you keep calling her Judge? Why do you keep calling her Your Honor? He's like, that doesn't matter. All that matters is the law. I'm like, no, there's a human being involved. And she specifically asked you to call her Michelle. Fucking call her Michelle. Like, It's not that hard. So like at that point, I was just like, dude, we're going to lose. Like, it's over. I know it. And he's like, no, it's really good. We're in great shape. And I was like, no, you are so, you're not even good at lying at this point. Like, you're so full of shit. And
that's when you're in trouble. A lawyer at lying.
Yeah. I was just like, it was like Jekyll and Hyde, man. I was like, where's the guy that I've been working with for the past 6 months? Like, he completely changed. So anyways,
get a good lawyer. That's a big lesson learned.
Oh, huge. Yeah. It was a super expensive one too.
So actually, I want to dig into that for a second real quick if we can, because this is one of the first times we've had a guest talk about, the legal side of things here.
Sure.
So just like going out and finding these contractors and everything, how did you settle on this guy? What did you do when you were looking for him? Did you how many cases have you won? How many cases have you lost? What did that look like?
Well, yeah. So he came as a referral, which also watch who your referrals are coming from. But I also did research on him, and everything that I was finding kept going back to him as the best option. He had tons of great reviews, which I was like, what? And I actually, honestly, I had worked with him previously on a case a couple years earlier when I was getting into short-term rental. I had a landlord, I had a landlord like totally screw me over on a house, and I had to sue him for like $20,000 or something. And that's a whole other long story. But anyways, I had used him before. We won that case, but the thing is we didn't get any. I realized, like, after the fact, hindsight, like, there was never any resistance on the other side, because that guy he was like so far into foreclosure and bankruptcy. Like, he rented me a house that was actively under foreclosure. Like, it was being foreclosed on. The auction was set for like a month down the road from when he rented it to me. So he basically took security deposit, first month's rent, second month's rent, and then and also, like, you can't do short-term rental in that neighborhood at all. And the thing was the HOA wouldn't talk to me. They would only talk to the homeowner. And I like flat out asked the lady, I was like, can I do short-term rental in this neighborhood? Yes or no? And she was like, I'm sorry, we can't talk to you. And I was like,
wow.
It's not like it's a yes or no. Like, I don't I'm not getting a straight answer from the landlord, like, all red flags. But that was when I was very early on in the arbitrage game. It was like right when I was getting going. So I ended up getting screwed on that one. But that's, to answer the question, that's how I'd used the guy before, and had good experience with him. That's the thing. He had great reviews. He seemed very good on that case. He really knows the law, but he didn't really have like a personality side to, like a personality, or I don't know what you call it, like
charisma.
Yeah, I guess, or just like the humanity factor of like understanding other people's needs, like when they're telling you what they want, like.
Yeah, I mean, communication 101. If someone says, "Call me Michelle," and you keep saying Your Honor, you obviously have a problem of active listening there.
Yeah.
Just listen. No, that's actually a great story. So, I mean, I don't want to harp too much, and I don't want to go too much longer, but I am curious to know, on the short-term rental side, what do you think, as a short-term rental arbitrage host for many years? What would you say was your biggest learning lesson or biggest mistake in that business?
Knowing what I know now, I would say the biggest thing would be starting with the end in mind. As it should be with any, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it just hit me like so good. Somebody said, all of our life is focused on the exit, right? Essentially, like, if you think about it, our death is our ultimate exit, right? Mm-hmm. So we spend our whole life preparing for that. And why not go into every situation that you get into with the exit in mind? Like, the guy, he was like joking, but he's like, man, now I'm so focused on the exit and everything I do. Anytime I enter a room, the first thing I'm looking for is the exit. And I was like, he's like, I want to be prepared if a fire breaks out or something. I got to know where to go. And I was like, that's like a smart way of thinking about it. But like, from a business standpoint, I mean, I just started up trying to make cash flow, which I think is how like 98% of people start up, because they're just trying to find cash flow to replace their income. And really, if you start with a plan for an exit, first of all, because that sets your mind to the point of building big enough that you can exit for whatever that sum might be. It might be $1 million, it might be 10 million, it might be 100 million, it might be $1 billion, whatever. But start with that exit. In the short-term rental space, like, there are companies like Vacasa who will actually buy a management company. So why not go? Like, I literally just had this conversation 2 days ago with somebody. I said, go to Vacasa, talk to their mergers and acquisitions team, and find out exactly what they want a business to look like in order to sell it to them and then go build that. Right? Like, why try to reinvent the wheel? Go find out, like, and ask what recent acquisitions have been. Like, I started doing the math on some of the stuff on their, I think it was on their website maybe, but like they're paying like $100,000 for properties takeovers.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so go
Right.
build 20 properties if you want to make $2 million in the next 2 years. You know, you can do that in cash flow, but why not build the company and have it ready to sell?
Yeah. I think that that's actually like genius advice because you're basically just talking about like reverse engineer it, right? So figure out what the end is going to be and just back into that, you know, even in wholesaling, right? It's like they say reverse wholesaling, go
I was gonna
find
say, I
out what
was
the
gonna say
buyers
that's
in that area actually want, right? And then just go market to those properties to get them the properties they want so you're not running around marketing to everyone in the neighborhood. Right? It's like reverse engineer that process, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at it like a staircase. You know, I think about like if I'm standing at the bottom of a staircase, I always picture like this the staircase in my parents' basement looking up at the upstairs.
Right.
But you know, I just picture like look at that door at the top and what does that exit look like, right? And then work those stairs backwards to where you are right now, rather than everyone starts focusing on the first step and then they're like, oh shit, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? Well, you can map all that out ahead of time.
Yeah.
And you can just start and say, okay, where do I want this business to go? Like I'm looking at a business acquisition right now that has the potential for, you know, a 9-figure exit. And it's only a $4 million company right now, but I'm like, if I can get into it, like I'm starting with that exit in mind. And I'm like, okay, I know what needs to be done, or I think I know, but I'm going to go find who's going to buy that. If it's Blackstone or whoever, whatever hedge fund will buy that. And I'll shop it around before it exists. Right. And I'm going to go shop it around and say, all right, what exactly do you need it to look like? And I'm also potentially partnering with people who have experience doing that and massive exits. And so, you know, if we can start there and just work backwards and then just say, okay, like move on. You know, the hardest part is just when you're taking over something that's already existing to start correcting the direction of the ship.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
yeah, I really love that. I think that last piece of advice, you know, just start with the exit in mind is phenomenal advice for anyone listening. And it's like none of us really take the time to do that. And I think it would help even like shiny object syndrome, right? Like in the beginning, you're trying to run around, do a million things. You don't know what you want because you're just chasing after cash flow. But it's like if you just focused on the one thing and then figured out what the exit looks like, it's so much easier to
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And when you start with the exit in mind, it's like, okay, well, if I'm like, what does that look like, right? Like, what does $100 million exit look like? Well, that means we probably have to be doing about $20 million in revenue. So what do we need to do in order to get to 20 million in revenue?
Right.
What does that look like? So 20 million means 2 million a month or whatever it is, like 1.8 million a month. And then, you know, and then just work backwards. Like, okay, what do we need to be doing in order to do that? Right. Like how many, like what I'm looking at is a retail location. So it's like, how many retail locations do you need? How many profit centers versus like what are you going to be doing to generate that revenue?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. So Tom, anyone who wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way? I see your IG handle here.
Yeah. My name's pretty much unique across the internet. So if you look Tom John Swan, you'll find me on pretty much any platform. That's TOMJOHNSWAN. You'll find me pretty much anywhere because that's my handle. There are other Tom Swans in the world, but no Tom
John Swan.
No Tom John Swans. That's I'm the only one that I know of.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, thank you. Jake, do you have any last questions before we end this session?
No questions. I just want to say those were some really great shares. I think it was interesting to get into, like I said, the legal side of things. We've had a lot of people bring up a lot of different mistakes in the last, previous 8 weeks. But That was really great. After learning all of that about you, though, I still think the most interesting thing is that you've met somebody else with the last name Remillard.
Not only met, I grew up with.
Yeah, right.
Well, Tom, I know you're in the middle of exiting a business right now, so I definitely want to have you back on in a few months and talk more about that experience. So
sure,
we'll
I'd
get you
love
back
to.
on as a guest.
Yeah, I'd love to. I appreciate you having me on. It's I'm happy to share my experiences with this stuff, and if anyone wants to learn more details, although we did get pretty in the weeds on this one, but
Yeah.
definitely reach out to me.
Yeah. Are you still doing a short-term rental course?
It's active, but I don't like actively push it. I actually my thing right now that I'm focusing on is business credit, because that's actually how I launched my business. And so in recent months, like over the years, I've coached people on it, but just kind of on the side, like just helping people out.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really thought about actively doing it as a business. But as I've been exiting this rental business, I'm like focused on what the next step is. And I like a lot of people were hitting me up for business credit advice, and I was like, I can actually turn this into a legitimate business, because there's a lot of people that need business credit and need help getting access to capital, because
there you go.
It's getting more expensive and harder to get. So
anyone listening that needs some business credit help, reach out to Tom John Swan.
That's it.
All right. Thank you so much, Tom. Let's end this. And like I said, I'll have you back in a few months.
Right on. Thanks so much.
Nice to have you.
Thanks.